In every human experience, there exists a fundamental principle that governs both cause and consequence. This principle is neither dramatic nor hidden, it's the law of return. For every word spoken in malice, every subtle act of manipulation, every unspoken hope for someone's failure, a return mechanism activates. It doesn't seek revenge. It simply restores balance. For individuals who walk with clarity, often labeled as the chosen ones in spiritual discourse, this balance may not be immediate. But it is consistent. While those who operate in the shadows assume their actions go unnoticed, the system that governs the universe records with precision. And that record, over time, returns with consequences. Throughout history, people have believed they could engineer someone's downfall through quiet efforts, whispers behind closed doors, strategic exclusion, or silent sabotage. These tactics often leave their targets confused, isolated, and questioning reality. But the same silence meant to break a person eventually becomes the environment in which they rebuild. The individuals targeted are rarely ordinary. They are often those who disrupt systems without even trying, people who move differently, who question narratives, and who don't easily fit into expected molds. Their stillness is misinterpreted as weakness, when in fact, it's strategy. Their refusal to react isn't submission. It's discipline. And when the time comes, that very discipline becomes the force that changes the outcome. Those who expected a breakdown instead witness something else, resilience. And when resilience matures, it becomes presence. A presence that cannot be controlled, manipulated, or erased. The same people who tried to fracture this kind of individual often find themselves unsettled by their ability to remain steady through the storm. What's important to recognize is that such transformation isn't built in isolation. It's forged in fire. The fire of betrayal, public doubt, exclusion, and psychological pressure. It doesn't create victims, it reveals strength. And more importantly, it reveals who is aligned with truth and who is operating under illusion. Nowhere is this more evident than when a collective attempts to overpower an individual. Whether it's in professional environments, family systems, or spiritual circles, groups often derive their strength from numbers rather than from shared integrity. But numbers, without clarity, crumble. Collective action based on insecurity or dominance cannot withstand the stillness of one person who has done their inner work. That is the silent collapse many observers miss. It's not an explosion. It's erosion. One by one, the people who relied on shared deception lose their footing, not because someone attacked them, but because their illusion encountered reality. And reality always wins, eventually. This confrontation doesn't require force. It requires presence. A type of presence that doesn't argue, doesn't match noise with noise, but instead holds space. The impact of such stillness is often misjudged, until it becomes too powerful to ignore. It doesn't just shake individuals, it destabilizes entire networks built on control. This phenomenon also exposes something deeper, the fragility of inherited darkness. Many people operate under learned behaviors, belief systems, manipulation tactics, and fear strategies passed down generationally. These behaviors masquerade as strength, but at their core, they are rooted in fear. When someone emerges who is not reactive to these behaviors, someone who chooses reflection over retaliation, those inherited systems lose traction. They stop working. The group that once functioned through unspoken codes of intimidation finds itself without a compass. Because the target, the one meant to collapse, isn't playing the game. And that refusal to play is where true change begins. Not in the collapse of institutions, but in the subtle shifts of energy. The confidence once used to dominate becomes desperation. The silence once seen as weakness becomes leadership. The individual no longer needs to engage, because their very existence is enough to alter the outcome. In this way, the legacy of manipulation is not just interrupted, it ends. Not with violence. Not with revenge. But with clarity. Let's move deeper into the mechanics of this shift. True power doesn't require an audience. And more importantly, it doesn't require allies. This is a truth often misunderstood by those who rely on collective strength. They assume an individual alone must be vulnerable. That assumption, however, collapses in the presence of someone who does not require agreement to feel secure. Independence becomes threatening not because it is aggressive, but because it is self-sustaining. It removes the need for validation. When someone walks into a room without expectation, they are no longer negotiating identity. They are simply being. That beingness alone begins to disassemble the structures around them, because those structures were often built to contain dependence. This is particularly evident in environments where conformity is disguised as unity. A group moving in synchronization may appear strong, but if the foundation is built on fear or imitation, one person moving with original thought is enough to cause friction. The group begins to notice. The illusion of togetherness begins to falter. Not because of confrontation, but because truth is quietly showing up. That is where most people are caught off guard. They expect opposition to be loud, reactive, and easy to dismiss. What they don't expect is neutrality. Stillness. A refusal to engage in performative conflict. That unexpected stillness becomes a mirror. And what people see in that mirror determines how they respond. If they see strength, they may become inspired. If they see their own weaknesses, they may project. But either way, the dynamic shifts. The person who was once the outsider becomes the reference point. That's the real disruption, not a clash, but a reset in perception. Many assume external power is the strongest force in a conflict. Influence, resources, alliances, these are seen as the tools of victory. But internal mastery is stronger. When someone has resolved their own insecurities, met their past with honesty, and integrated their shadow, they no longer carry triggers. And without triggers, manipulation doesn't work. This is the edge that separates a leader from a reactor. The one who holds mastery doesn't need to convince anyone of their position. Their presence becomes the position. Others may try to provoke, test, or undermine them, but nothing shifts because the individual has no internal attachment to validation or image. And that's what creates collapse in the opposition. Their strategy depends on finding a weakness. But when every tactic returns void, the system begins to fail. This failure isn't immediate. It unravels slowly, piece by piece. Until those who once appeared unshakable begin to retreat, not because they lost a fight, but because they lost control. In the first part, we explored how the unraveling of manipulation, collective illusion, and generational control begins with the presence of a person who does not yield. Part 2 continues with how clarity disrupts deception, why detachment becomes protection, and how a chosen individual operates beyond the reach of fear or praise. When individuals attempt to create conflict, they often rely on others playing into expected patterns. Whether through provocation or strategic misdirection, they count on emotional engagement. But stillness interrupts this. It denies the aggressor a narrative to control. When someone refuses to react, the one initiating the attack is left exposed. Not because they were countered, but because their tactics lost momentum. Stillness is not passive. It is active awareness. In this space, clarity is maintained, decisions are measured, and self-control becomes a form of armor. Many do not realize that choosing not to respond to chaos is often the strongest position available. Those who try to manipulate often do so from a place of deep insecurity. Their power depends on your reaction. They mirror fear, hoping to amplify it. But if no fear is present, if the person they target remains centered, the strategy collapses. This is why individuals rooted in their own self-awareness become disruptive to unstable systems. Their mere presence alters the dynamic. There is no agreement to participate in the emotional currency others depend on. And when the emotional economy of control fails, the entire structure weakens. Sometimes, the most impactful act isn't confrontation but disinterest. When someone attempts to distract, provoke, or entice, and receives no reaction in return, the strategy collapses. Silence, in this context, is not avoidance, it is a refusal to surrender energy. Refusing to play a rigged game is not cowardice. It's strategy. And this form of non-engagement is difficult for those seeking control to interpret. In their world, silence means weakness. But to someone who is internally stable, silence is a message: I do not accept this framework. And this disturbs those who depend on manipulation. Their plans don't fail because they were resisted. They fail because they were irrelevant to the one they were meant to impact. In groups where unity is performative, individual presence becomes a challenge. Such unity often exists on the surface, a collective formed not by shared purpose, but by shared avoidance, shared fear, or shared resentment. These groups tend to dissolve when an individual refuses to conform. This is why people who walk alone are sometimes feared or resented. Their autonomy questions the validity of groupthink. Their independence calls out codependence. And without attacking anyone, they force those around them to examine their motives. Unity based on similarity crumbles when difference is introduced. But unity based on truth remains steady. When an individual chooses not to match the group's behavior, they reveal what kind of unity actually existed. If it dissolves quickly, it was never strength. It was fear dressed as order. This exposure is not accidental. It is part of what makes the presence of a grounded person transformative. They don't just hold space. They reveal what that space was hiding. When someone cannot be manipulated, they often become the subject of intense scrutiny. People want to understand what they can't control. But when they can't decode a person's energy, when every effort to draw them into dysfunction fails, it becomes clear that something else is present: discipline. Discipline looks quiet. It doesn't broadcast itself. But it is built through deliberate effort. When someone holds that kind of discipline, it becomes apparent in everything they do. There are no unnecessary explanations. No apologies for existing. Just a quiet, unshakable consistency. This consistency sends a message to those who operate through chaos: you are no longer in charge of the outcome. And that message is destabilizing. Because power, when unchecked, is rarely used to uplift. It's used to dominate. But if someone doesn't accept domination, the person attempting it is left with no tools. They are no longer feared. They are simply ineffective. Resisting a direct attack is one kind of strength. But resisting the temptation to prove something is another. In a world built on appearance and validation, the refusal to explain or defend oneself is seen as rebellion. But in truth, it is mastery. People often fall into traps not because they are weak, but because they believe they must justify themselves. But justification is not clarity. Clarity doesn't need to explain. By remaining rooted in internal conviction, the chosen ones, those attuned to their higher path, avoid the traps laid through flattery, provocation, and superficial praise. They recognize that every interaction is an invitation to rise or to regress. And they choose rise, quietly, consistently, and without performance. This lack of interest in applause is what makes them disruptive. Because the system of control depends on people needing recognition. Without that need, the control loses power. Spiritual and emotional well-being begins with energetic boundaries. People often assume that defense must be visible: a shield, a barrier, a spoken refusal. But real defense happens invisibly. It begins with frequency. When a person operates at a consistent energetic level, when they avoid gossip, conflict, comparison, and manipulation, they protect themselves from entanglement. This doesn't require confrontation. It simply means that low-frequency behaviors cannot attach. That's why people with strong internal clarity rarely attract prolonged chaos. The chaos shows up, attempts to engage, and then leaves. There is no fuel. No permission. No mutual agreement. Just energetic neutrality. In this sense, energy becomes not just a shield, but a signal. And those operating from dysfunction learn quickly, there is no entry point. The person they hope to drain has nothing to offer them. Nothing but stillness. The greatest disruption isn't force. It's integrity. It is the refusal to compromise one's values for convenience, approval, or reward. In a system built on appearance, someone who chooses alignment over applause is seen as dangerous. Because they cannot be bought, manipulated, or redirected. This kind of person doesn't rise through chaos. They rise by stepping out of it. And once they rise, they don't return to prove anything. They've already won by not becoming what tried to destroy them. In every room they enter, they become the measuring stick. Not by preaching. But by being. By embodying what others struggle to pretend. And when people see that level of authenticity, they are faced with a choice: elevate or retreat. Either way, the presence of integrity changes the environment. It shifts the standard. And that shift, more than anything, is what ends dysfunctional cycles. Because once someone sees the real thing, they can no longer accept imitation. The universe does not forget. It does not punish. But it does correct. The correction may not arrive on schedule. But it always arrives. And when it does, it restores balance, not through revenge, but through truth. This script is not about triumph in the traditional sense. It is about returning to wholeness. It's about remembering that silence, integrity, and clarity are the most powerful weapons in a world built on noise. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to defend to be respected. You don't need to retaliate to win. If you are that individual, if you've ever been underestimated, excluded, or targeted for simply being clear, understand this: you weren't meant to collapse. You were meant to stand still while everything false fell away. You didn't defeat anyone. You simply became undeniable. As we come to the end of this message, one truth should be clearer than ever: being chosen is not about status, fame, or recognition. It's about responsibility. It's about carrying a presence so stable, so centered, that it shakes everything built on illusion. You weren't selected to be admired. You were selected to disrupt patterns. To bring light without performance. To stand firm when others fold. That's not an easy path, and it's not one everyone will understand. But it is the only path that leads to legacy. Now, you may still be in the middle of that process. Maybe your silence hasn't been recognized yet. Maybe your integrity still feels like it's costing you more than it's giving. But let this remind you, the shift doesn't always happen loud. It happens subtly, when the old world realizes it can't bend you anymore. The strength you carry doesn't lie in reaction. It lies in restraint. Not because you are indifferent, but because you know your power doesn't need an audience. It is enough on its own. And the people who tried to provoke you? Who misread your calm as weakness? They now see the truth in real time. The plans they laid, the chaos they stirred, it all fell apart not because you fought harder, but because you refused to join them in dysfunction. You were the shift. You were the silence that interrupted their certainty. You were the presence they never calculated for. Remember, elevation is not just about rising. It's about choosing not to descend, no matter how loud the descent around you becomes. It's about knowing your value in rooms that try to devalue you. It's about choosing alignment over approval, every time. And while that choice may come with loneliness, misunderstanding, or rejection, it also comes with clarity. With freedom. With a legacy untouched by manipulation. That's why you are still standing. The ones who underestimated you, who whispered your name with doubt, who depended on your silence to mean surrender, they now realize that silence was your strategy. That your calm was the storm they couldn't control. So what's next? You keep walking. You continue holding the standard. You stay unreadable, grounded, and steady. Because that's what disrupts everything that depends on reaction, attention, and control. You don't just survive this way, you transform everything you touch. And let this be the final word, you don't need to announce who you are. The ones who need to know already feel it. The energy you carry speaks louder than anything you could say. So protect that energy. Strengthen it. Guard it like your future depends on it, because it does. If this message resonated with you, it's because you've already lived parts of it. You've already felt the pull to go higher, even when the weight tried to keep you grounded. You've already stepped away from what looked appealing but felt off. That was your training. That was your preparation. Now it's your time to walk fully in it, with no apology, no explanation, no fear. So if this hit your spirit, do one thing, don't just agree with it, live it. Drop a 999 in the comments to confirm what you already know. Subscribe to join others walking the same path. And like this video so the next chosen one still in silence might find it. Because the world may not celebrate your rise. But the ones watching in silence, they feel it. And that's enough. Stay rooted. Stay unreadable. Stay chosen. If this message spoke to your spirit. If you found yourself nodding in quiet agreement, recognizing truths you've always felt but never heard said aloud, then it wasn't by accident that you landed here. This message was for the ones who are done shrinking. For those who are ready to stop explaining and start evolving. If that's you, here's what to do next. First, like this video. That simple action helps this message reach others who are still walking silently, waiting for confirmation that they're not alone. Second, subscribe. We're building more than a channel, we're building a movement of grounded, focused, unshakable individuals who refuse to conform to noise. Your voice, your presence, belongs here. Third, drop 999 in the comments. It's not just a number, it's a signal. A quiet confirmation that you're awake, aware, and walking with purpose. You're not here for attention. You're here for alignment. Let this be the moment you step forward without hesitation. The world doesn't need more noise, it needs more clarity. And you carry that. Now it's time to live it.